and welcome to the Hope Report, your light in the darkness, brought to you by the Lindale Recovery Network. I am Jason Perry. Melissa is out today. She's had a doctor appointment, and I'm really excited to bring today's show to you. I'm going to actually just adjust the frame a little bit so you can have some context. So you guys know that I am all about the culture war. I believe that the church has been disengaged from the culture war for too long. In fact, many have surrendered it for a long time. And, you know, we've also been disengaged from politics, unfortunately. Well, we unilaterally disengaged. There are others in the left side church that have been preaching from the pulpit and leading everyone into doom. But we have surrendered in the Christian conservative aspect. And there are people like Doug Wilson and other people out there who are leading the charge against that, you know, John MacArthur, et cetera. One part that I think is severely neglected is the culture war. And we've had Topher on here and DCure and others who are actively engaging on this side. I know music to be an extremely powerful weapon because when it was part of what pulled me dark when I was angry, I tried to find people who were as angry as I was, and I drifted into some really dark stuff. It was also music that helped pull me out of that when I found the Lord at 37. I'm 50, going to be 51 now. When I found the Lord at 57, you know, country music was part of the reason that pulled me out. I started listening, you know, it was patriotism first. I listened to Toby Keith's, you know, Angry American song. And it just happened to be somebody made a really cool video of all these bombs going off and all this warrior stuff. And it was really cool. And, you know, I started hearing people talking about God in a not so pissed off way. I mean, my favorite song when I went to the gym, as you guys know, is God Hates Us All by Slayer, which is, you know, the second I became a Christian, I couldn't listen to that anymore. It turned me off. And I've been in this quest to find music that is awesome to listen to work out in the gym and not put me to sleep. And I've stumbled across some really good bands out there. And I stumbled across, you know, a while ago, somebody named Tommy Vext. And this is a Christian conservative guy who has been fighting the music industry like Topher, like the Marine rapper have on the rap side. And really cancel culture came after him hard because he came out and supported Trump. He came out against the vaccine. He came about the election. He came out of all that stuff. And it's really strange because heavy metal used to be against authority and against all this. And then somehow it flipped and now it's all about, you know, the lockdowns and everything else, which seems like totally against what it should have been. But I started watching some stuff on Tommy, and he was saying some really profound things. And one of the things that absolutely floored me, which was the final straw, and I reached out to Topher to get an invite, was I was watching him in an interview somewhere else on another podcast show where he was talking about praying for his enemies. And in the Christian community, right, we talk about love. God is love. God is all that stuff. But God is holy, holy, and holy, 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 holy. And I've talked about that. But we really suck at loving each other the right way. Like even if somebody like, oh my God, you baptize babies, you're dead to me. Or you're post-millennial instead of pre-millennial, you're dead to me. You're a Calvinist instead of an Arminian, you're dead to me. And here was a guy who was talking about loving people who had done him wrong. So if we can't even love our brothers in the faith right, you know, and I'm like, I got to get this guy on. I know I've heard other stories where he had a near-death experience and a bunch of other things. His testimony, the bits and pieces I've heard scattered throughout the interwebs is really, really powerful. Now, he's in the waiting room and he can hear me now. So again, this is a Christian show. We're on Christian TV. Try to keep the cussing to a minimum. I know that I was a sailor. I was a SEAL and it was every other word out of my mouth. But I just want to throw that out there. There may be some slips in the language. Not everyone is there on their sanctification on language yet. So again, bear with us, but I want this to be as real and as heartfelt as possible. I can't wait to bring Tommy on. And Tommy, if you're ready to come on, give me a thumbs up and we'll bring it on. All right, everyone. Please welcome Tommy Vext to the show. Welcome, brother.
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm so pumped to have you on, man. I have never been so humbled to watch you on all these different things, nailing Christianity and walking it out without like, I mean, we either talk, I'm like, are you a Christian? And go ahead and say what you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my, my relationship with Christ is one that is, I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Protestant church, Lutheran church in Brooklyn. Um, and I came back to Christ in 2020. I've been
Praise the
sober
Lord.
for, yeah, I've been sober for almost 14 years. And I think that I had a lot of I think recovery was a way to bridge the gap between my understanding of God, because, unfortunately for me, when I was a kid, like you, I felt pushed out of the church, right? I feel like, my experience of the congregation I grew up in, the hypocrisy, I think the last straw was after I had done confirmation, um, they had kicked this homeless guy, Dan, out of church. He would come to church and he would sit and listen so he could get a cup of coffee. And, afterwards, when we would have social hour after the sermon, and they kicked him out. And then, so I kind of turned my back on the church because people falsely represented Christianity. And then, I went on my journey of, I got lost, and, my
Yeah, we
family.
can talk about all that. We're going to definitely go all the way back and let you unpack this. It's it's one of the best testimonies I've ever heard, and I've only heard it in snippets, brother. But
Yeah.
the part that, you're talking about, is we both grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in Boston. You grew up in New York. And I was surrounded by Catholic temples, like these big giant castles everywhere, right? And I've never felt further from God than all the guys who were going. And I was raised an atheist, and I would go to their confirmations and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, man, but even until I was 40, so I got saved at 37, I have never found a priest that was manly until I hit 40. And I found a guy called Ken Graves, a guy who had scars on his face and calluses on his hands and lived and was manly. Right. I'm like, that was the first time I ever saw a dude that was in the pulpit that I wanted to be like. So why would I ever even want to go there?
Yeah, I definitely understand that sentiment. There's also a guy, Kevin Kraft at Elevate Life Church in Frisco, Texas, who's like about 6'6" and a bodybuilder. And
okay.
we text every Sunday. And yeah, man, it's just, I think that there is something to be said about that. My father was a Vietnam veteran. My uncle, my godfather, my cousin served in Iraq, and I had friends went off after 9/11 to Afghanistan, and my dad kept a Bible. He read it every night, but he never talked. It was something he didn't really talk to us about.
So he didn't disciple you.
Yeah, my father was a very solitary person in his spirituality. And so that's something that when I got sober and, in recovery, they were like, you have to find a higher power of your own understanding. I had an example of a man who had like a solidarity and like a relationship with God, rather than someone who was in the word, rather than showing up to church and then, doing their 1 hour a week.
Yeah.
And so that helped. And then, further on, when I was about 12 years sober, I had another spiritual awakening during COVID, where I actually experienced demonic attacks as a result of being outspoken against, the BLM riots, and just a lot of the overextension of communistic abuse of power and authoritarianism that we were experiencing, that I was able to recognize because I liked history and I studied history.
Imagine that. Good. That's great.
And for 14, for all those years of sobriety, I traveled all over the world. And when my band members would be hungover from doing drugs and blow, I'd be at museums and I'd be at monuments and I'd be reading and that's what I'm into,
Yeah. So let's tell everyone who you are today. So people, we're on a lot of Christian TV shows. A lot of people aren't going to know who you are. So tell them who you are. I mean, who you are today, the redeemed Tommy Vext.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, my story is an interesting one. It's definitely,
We're going to go back through that. So we're going to go back to the beginning after this. I just want to show what God's done with your life to this point, and then we're going to go back and walk it forward if we can.
Yeah. So like the cliff notes of accomplishments, I guess you could say, is
Sure.
I went from being a homeless drug addict. I've been in bands. I grew up playing music in CBGBs, but I eventually got record deals in my early 20s. I took my addiction with me. I'd been using drugs since I was about 11 or 12 years old. Then I moved to LA, hit rock bottom eventually, did get to travel, did get to tour, um, signed record deals, blew it, got sober, walked away from music, focused on on my new relationship with God. Then after over a year of sobriety, I had moved back to New York City. Uh, I was then almost murdered during a home invasion where my apartment was broken into by a drug addict relative. We'll get into all that. I definitely died and had a near death experience and had a crossover experience. Came back, and then, things just kind of got wild from there. And I had to testify against that family member. I wound up becoming a person because I wound up remaining sober by the grace of God. And then I started getting asked to share my testimony, whether it was at colleges, at recovery meetings, in churches. And so I started speaking all over New York and Los Angeles. And then I wound up moving back to Los Angeles, started a nonprofit organization, and then started working at a rehab. And so I ran a men's facility in Santa Monica. And then
Awesome.
my boss took a liking to me, and they paid for me to get a bunch of certifications, and I became a sober companion. Then my first big client was Justin Bieber. I lived with him.
Oh, wow.
I helped him. Yeah, I've been to church with him. He's an interesting kid. We worked together years ago, so probably like about 5-6 years ago. And then most famously, I moved on to work for a band called Five Finger Death Punch, which their singer was an alcoholic and needed help, and eventually had to be institutionalized to get help to keep him safe from himself and others. And while he was doing his program, the band had asked me to fill in because it happened in the middle of a tour. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got like famous overnight, playing shows in Europe, festivals with Linkin Park and Rammstein with 150 to 300,000 people in attendance, and came back to the States and had all these followers, and then all these record deals started coming my way, and I had a side project band. I signed that band, and then released a cover of Zombie. The song was supposed to be a duet with Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries, the original writer of the song. And she passed away the night before she was scheduled to come into the studio. And, the label was like, we have to put this out. This is a big deal. This is and so I basically said, I don't want to make any money off this woman's death. And so
class act.
Yeah. And so I created a trust fund with the label and my legal team. And I routed, I'm the only person who played on the song in the band. And so I had recorded that song actually before the band was a thing, and I forfeit all of the publishing royalties to the children. So she had 4 children, gave them far over in the millions, multiple millions of dollars, went on tour, toured all over the world with bands like Shinedown. I've done shows with Incubus and, Slipknot and, Five Finger Death Punch and Breaking Benjamin and just everybody, and, had massive success. And then toured, had the #1 song in 2018 on Billboard on the rock charts. Zombie was the biggest rock song to come out in the last 17 years or something like that. We blew past pretty much everybody. It was remarkable. And then the band became a household name. I became, recognized everywhere I went, and, social media and all this other stuff. And, I stayed going to my meetings, and I stayed, and again, at this time, I was like, I still had a relationship with God, but, there was like all this show business and women and money and, money being stolen, and then eventually 2020 happened, and after a couple of weeks, I started to investigate, and I got in touch with a couple of virologists and immunologists, one of which was Dr. Rashid Buttar. We built a relationship, and these guys who are working on this stuff were actually giving me intel on what was really going on, how it was made, who made it. A lot of the things that I sounded like a crazy person in 2020 saying is because I was directly communicating with people who had actually worked on it before in 2015 when it was at a lab in Atlanta. So I don't want to get too far into this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to put anybody in. I've learned. I've learned how far up the chain this goes and how dangerous it is to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, we just got to be slightly obscure. So
anyway, needless to say, in my naivety, I took this as someone has to do something. I have to say something. So I used my platform to try to educate the public. And that was a problem. And then I used, then the BLM riots happened. And first it was very peculiar that, tens of thousands of people were running around the streets, setting it on fire, and nobody got sick and died. So then I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. This definitely isn't a thing. Nobody was reporting on the dozens and dozens of rapes and assaults that were going on during the peaceful protests. I've never heard of 17 women being raped during a peaceful protest. I think that's insane. And it just goes to show you what was really going on, right? I still to this day believe that those riots were state funded.
100%.
It was part of a psyop, and it was completely to derail, the culture, and terrorize people. It was a tactic that was used during the overthrow of the Ukrainian election in 2004 during the Orange and Color revolutions. This is a tactic that because you served, that there are agencies that specifically do this to other countries, and for the first time, America had to watch us do it to ourselves.
Yeah, it's what 3-letter agencies do. It's what Green Berets do. It's what everything else. What we do. I mean, we have an actor that's elected over in the Ukraine that, won't even get started on this. So let's focus to what are you doing right now? And then we're going to go back to the beginning. We'll go to your childhood. We'll walk it forward. You hit a very high level view there with a brief summary. I just want to pull some maybe teaching moments out of this. What we like to do is, because a lot of people that watch this show, we are sponsored by the Lindell Recovery Network, which is a nonprofit that Mike Lindell starts that is 100% free for everyone out there that helps people with addiction. And what it does is it pairs people with their hope match. Somebody who's come out of addiction to somebody, that they can go through a bunch of online resources. It's a self-help thing. It's not meant to be the end result. It's just meant to be an onboard to getting sober. So, so what I like to do is I like to try to find moments like when you mentioned with your dad was very involved with the Bible. But what I believe and what I teach in my church and everywhere else and everybody who comes through our Christian Warrior program is that our job as men is to pass on our identity in Christ, right? We have to pass on our identity to Christ and disciple our kids, because our kids are going to have to bury us. They're going to deal with cancer. They're going to deal with disappointment. They're going to deal with all these horrible things. And you've dealt with them all personally, including being homeless and drug addiction and, violence and everything else. The only thing that I've ever seen work against all that is Jesus Christ. I work with the baddest men on the planet, right? And the only ones who kept their sanity were the Christians. They're the only ones who were able to come back and have happy lives after. The rest of them are still broken to this day in some way, and they have a tourniquet that they use. And it might be, it might be achievement, it might be drugs, it might be alcohol, it might be women, it might be this. But you can see they're just absolutely miserable. And so again, I try to pull teaching moments out of that. So what are you doing right now? What's your big initiative right now? I want to give you a chance to talk about that, and then we can go, and we got so many different ways we can take this. I can talk to you forever. So I'm really excited.
Well, I mean, right now, last year I released I released 3 albums. So I had gotten to a lawsuit with my label. I got canceled for speaking out. Then I put on a MAGA hat, and then that was the end.
Yeah.
And then there was a very, I mean, it went as far as, I mean, there was a very, very concerted effort and colluding effort to destroy me.
Sure.
Right. So, you know, first, you know, they dug up an ex-girlfriend and had her, you know, file false reports that I beat her and tried to kill her. There was no evidence that it got thrown out of court. Then she persisted to try to get a restraining order against me. You know, and all this, this is somebody who I have nothing to do with, and I broke up with and left, you know what I mean, for infidelity reasons. You know, and then simultaneously the label was trying to get me to sign a conservatorship. I don't know if your listeners know or aware, Britney Spears was a very famous case that just went through that, where you sign over all your rights, you have to forfeit your constitutional rights, basically assigning someone as your caretaker and trust because you're mentally unfit. So, you know, these things that I think that if I did not have, I would not have been able to take on all this stuff. This is not a result of me, you know, it's a result of the small voice inside, which is where I think God and Christ speaks to us. And when I think about what you're saying about the men who keep their sanity after walking through hell, because I just went through I went through some stuff. You know, I've been through some stuff, but it pales in comparison to what a lot of my friends who served have seen and done. I think that it comes down to laying your burden down. And I think that we as men, I think sometimes there's this false portrayal of masculinity that means, you know, we should be able to hold on and we should be able to carry the weight of the world for our families and for others. But the reality is that placing those burdens in the hands of my creator is what frees me to be the person that he intends me to be, because those things are too heavy for us. You know, it's like trying to walk a detail with 400 pounds strapped to your back. We can't walk through life with that weight. If we persist, you know, in trying to take on that weight, it's almost disrespectful to God, because it's us saying that I got this, right? And I've learned that those are the 3 most dangerous words to a man is I got this, you know? And the best prayer that I know is, I don't know, I need help.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
We should not be like Atlas, right? You know, we're in a war, we're in a battle, and it's not John Wick, right? It's more like a SEAL team. You need your brothers and sisters of the faith with you, and you know, with your creator at your back. And it's more like, instead of being Atlas and holding up the world, you're more in the shield wall, right? You're locking shields with your brothers and sisters who are there. And, you know, and your shield isn't to protect you, it's to protect them, and they're protecting you, right? That's where the trust comes in. So again, forming that war council and getting good people around you who love you, who know everything about you, and you know everything about them. It's mutually assured destruction. And that is who, you know, what we recommend here. We're going to take a quick 60-minute break, and we'll be right back.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0. When I invented My Pillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. My Pillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature regulating thread. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit MyPillow.com.
All right, we're back with Tommy Vext. So, Tommy, I'd like to go back to the beginning, man. I'd like to go back to you growing up, the type of neighborhood you grew up in. I know that you were kind of raised in the church, but not truly discipled. Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I have a twin brother and my younger sister. All of us are adopted. My twin brother and I are adopted from a different mother. We were abandoned when we were born. My birth mother was a drug addict. As from what I know, she pulled her IVs out once we were born and left the hospital to go get high, and that was it. And then she resurfaced 4 or 5 years after we had been adopted. And then my parents fought her in court, and she eventually gave up. And so we stayed with my parents, and then my parents adopted my sister. And my father was like I said, my father was a Vietnam vet. My mom sang in the church choir. We had a fairly normal upbringing. I grew up in South Brooklyn in a very Irish Italian neighborhood. And so, it was a very poor neighborhood. I remember Al Sharpton had come down and he said that we were white Harlem. And so it was but I definitely, before I started going to school, I always felt like I was different. You know what I mean? I didn't look like my parents. Obviously I understood that I was adopted, but again, my family does not understand racism. There's no, my mother's second husband was Jewish, and I'm so accustomed to having all different kinds of races and nationalities of people at the house, whether it's different religions or different cultures or different backgrounds. We were not raised to see color, and my parents would say, there is no color in the kingdom of God. And so that was interesting when I started getting older and I started running into people who had an issue with segregation, even in the 80s. So I was one of those things. And then I kind of just, my brother had problems. He had mental problems growing up. And that kind of tore my family apart. My father, when I was born, he was sober. And so he had been sober for about 20 years. And then when we were 15 years old or 14 or 15 years old, my brother had been institutionalized for about the third time. My dad took a drink, and as they say, the man takes a drink and the drink takes the man.
Yep.
And so, my brother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and it was a very scary thing to be so young. And he would have violent outbursts, and, to see him being dragged away by orderlies at hospitals. I have a strong fear of psychiatric medication. I saw them, they pumped him full of drugs. So, some of them made him worse. Some of them made it better. Some of them made him a zombie. I don't really think they knew exactly what they were doing. And it was just very scary. And I wanted my brother to just be normal.
Yeah.
And I wound up finding, music, and I found music, and then I did bands because I was in heavy metal bands because I was angry, but then I wanted to be like the rappers because they had money. And then, I became a teenage drug dealer. And
so where did the drugs start and how did they start?
I mean, it always starts innocently, it starts with stealing booze when you're a kid,
Yep.
At my neighbor's.
Pouring a little bit out of a little bit of each bottle.
Like doing that. And then there was a kid actually from my church. He had disabilities, but he was in his 20s, and we convinced him to buy us beer, and then that became a thing. And so we'd go drink beers behind the baseball field, in the wooded area, and hiding from our parents, and then started smoking weed, and then it turned into LSD and mushrooms and mescaline and psychedelics, and then it became ecstasy and cocaine. And once I started with the cocaine, that was pretty much the devil's dandruff. There's all kinds of funny words, but it's kind of quite literally what happens. And I think it poured Miracle-Gro on my alcoholism, right? And so,
right. Well, because it keeps you up for longer, so you can drink more. and you feel awake.
Well, it also makes you like if you have a miserable life, it makes you it releases serotonin.
Yep.
So if you're a depressed person or a suicidal person, which I was for most of my life, that would make me feel like good and oh, this is how people are supposed to feel. But then the
Right.
crash was always inevitably, you know, devastating, and so you'd have to drink into oblivion to avoid the feelings of the crash. And and then also too, it's like the things that we do on drugs and alcohol are so just it's insanity, and
Yep.
so you get this spiritual sickness as a result of the memories of the debacle of the last debacle you just went through. So
Yep.
it creates a cyclical addiction is a very cyclical disease, and it has multiple components. It's not just there's a physical allergy to substance, there's a mental obsession, and then there's a spiritual malady. And I think the spiritual sickness is probably the most devastating.
Yeah. We do countless testimonies on here, and what we typically find, and I don't know what it was in your thing. Sometimes God will come in for somebody who's medically addicted to heroin or crack, and
Mhm.
boom, it's done, right? And
Mhm.
it's their desire for it's gone, and they're fixed. Other people, it's a 20-year slug,
Mhm.
right? But where God really excels in his miracles is when you empty yourself of self and you finally hit it and realize I don't got this, right? Take it
Yeah.
from me. And that's where God has shown up for countless people who've been on here. But for others, it's going to be a battle. And I don't know why for some it's a battle. I don't know if they haven't, surrendered it all to the Lord, or if that the Lord just wants them to become stronger doing it. But I'd love to hear again when you realized it was a problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had various run-ins. Eventually, I thought I was cool and I would sell drugs, and then I got jumped by a gang. My friend and I got jumped, and they ran me over with a car and beat me with baseball bats, and I had a frontal fracture in my skull, and just things like that had regularly happened, but that in particular situation scared me straight. And then I decided to throw myself into music, and I started
And what's
listening.
your age at this point? I just want to give people a
I think I
timeline.
was 19 or 20.
Okay, so right,
Yeah, so
hopefully
I
that's when
got
the
the
bells go
message
off.
pretty young. Yeah, I got the
Okay,
message pretty young. My friends stayed in it. A lot of them died. A lot of them went to jail. Some people stopped doing it. And I wound up, I wound up getting jobs working security at venues to try to meet people at record labels. And eventually, by the time I was 23, I got an audition for a band in LA. I got the audition. I went to LA. And I thought that was it. I'm like, all right, I'm safe. But I took myself with me.
yeah,
And I was still at an age where, looking back, like, there were times where I was like, man, I wish I would have got sober when I was a teenager, but I didn't know. And I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do, right? Like, I was like, oh, it's
yeah.
sex, drugs, and rock and roll, dude.
Well,
Like,
that's the part that's got to be so hard, right? Like these guys in these bands who you hear that they're sober and that they give their life to Christ and all that. It's like, man, like being around that much sin and that much temptation takes a level of faith that most would crush most people.
yeah, I mean, but there are way hard. I mean, look, I think there are way harder tests for people. Like, though, you look at World War II, right?
Sure.
After Bill and Bob created the 12-step programs in the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they were sending people over to war who had just got sober. They may have been sober,
Sure.
18, 19-year-old kids who were sober for like 3 months. And they went over to war and they fought against the Germans and then stayed
And saw
sober.
death on a scale that no one can
Yeah.
really fathom. Like
And then,
today,
yeah,
go ahead.
and they remain sober, but that's to me, that level of dependence upon God is a severe testament, because there's no cell phones, there's nothing. You're lucky if you get a letter every couple months,
Yeah.
you know. And we unfortunately, a lot of musicians would like to think they're curing cancer and think they're extremely very special and should be treated differently, when the fact is they're quite overprivileged.
Yeah. Well, your humbleness is definitely refreshing. I think, if people want to know what World War II, I think you got to take the beach landing from Saving Private Ryan and overlap that with the Darkness of Fury, that Brad Pitt tanker movie, which just showed them bulldozing, you know, tens of thousands of bodies into. I mean, the level of death that those guys in World War II experienced is unparalleled. But it's still hard, man, right? Like, because most people are, again, I don't want to say most. A lot of people are loyal because they don't have a lot of options. When you're a rock star and you got girls throwing themselves at you, and you got drugs around you all the time, when it's always right there, like me, I recommend when somebody wants to get clean, relocate, like go to northern Maine, get away from everything that was dragging you down, all your associations, recreate your life up there with strong Christian people or wherever, right? Get around a nice Christian culture and do that. This is your job, man, right? Your job is there. And it's like, that's got to be so hard. But I
think also too, like there's a thing about the divinity of God's timing. Like God does not give you anything that God can't handle.
Amen.
And the reality is that by the time, I didn't go platinum till I was 35. No, I was 35 or 36. And I didn't get success in my career like that until I was 35. So, I got sober at 27. So it was quite a long time. I had to walk through getting murdered by my twin brother. We'll get to that. That's the person who actually tried to kill me. I had to stay sober through that. I had to, dedicate my life to service. It couldn't just be about, me being sober. I had to actually exercise the 12 step. And then, eventually all the things that we go through builds us up to be in a position to handle what God has for us. And then, I think the retrospect of the last couple of years have been understanding that I had to, I was given everything I ever dreamed of. And then I had a choice for everything to be taken away from me or to be silent. And I chose to lose everything to speak in truth and to say what was right.
Amen.
And sometimes I think there's people like Andy Frisella and Ian Smith became two of my best friends, who Andy's used his platform. He's like a self-made billionaire.
A lot of people aren't going to know who they are. So if you want to frame those out a little bit.
Yeah. So Andy went from living on a mattress in a supplement store to running a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry where he employs thousands of people. And, he didn't make his employees get vaccinated. He's dedicated his podcast to constantly telling the real truth of the news, and whether they talk about the culture war and this, that, the other. And he's been fighting this, and he's also been making sure he makes room for employment for people who are also in the fight. But yeah, it's like, sometimes it gets frustrating because you have these men who, we dedicated our lives to the fight. I think there's two types of patriots. There's the sacrificial and the beneficial. Yep. So there are a lot of people, and I will say this, there's a lot of people who, sell t-shirts, and they made a lot of money being outspoken in the 11th hour. And that's fine. But there are people like me who I was a multi-millionaire with billions of streams, and, I had everything. Literally everything. And I could call anyone at any time and get anything done. And, I was flying all over the world and being adored by fans and playing in arenas to nothing, to where, the industry, I'm not allowed.
Yeah. Well, that's God in you, though. That's God in you, dude. That call to service, that's the Holy Spirit. It's when you recognize injustice, right? It's when you recognize untruth, the lie of the enemy, and something kindles inside you where you say, I don't care the cost. It's right. This is right. It's true and it's right. And that's the difference, I think, between warriors of God and the sheep, right? The sheep who just go along and they just want, they're not the Templar Knights. They're not the Christian warriors. They're the ones that we have to protect, and we got to protect because we're called to protect who we got to protect. But, it's there's always gonna be a need for people like us to stand up and take heavies,
Well,
and
I think that's also that's part of you can't, you have to have faith over fear, right? And you have to understand that. I think that part of having hit rock bottom to a point where I was in homelessness and all this other stuff, the scope of reality changes, right? So if you can manage that, then everything, like, I have a roof over my head and I can buy food today, and like, it's not as bad as it was.
some
So,
crazy looking burgers I saw that you were eating, man.
yeah, I cooked last night. So, so I think it's like, but I do think there's a definitive difference between people who lost a lot to fight the good fight and people who capitalized off of it. And also too, like the enemy will always attack you in your place of God's gift for you. And so, that's another thing where I think a lot of people don't realize that we have dominion over those powers, just because of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. I was not taught till later on how to rebuke these kind of demonic attacks, or how to sever spiritual ties.
Yeah. ORW is a course that's what got me spirit filled. So I was intellectually saved. I didn't finish my testimony with you. And then about 3.5 years later, I went to ORW, Operation Restored Warrior. I think Justin Bieber went through it actually. And that's where I learned how to do all that. It's where they walked through my earliest memories all the way up, cut my soul ties, all that stuff. It was extremely powerful. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a heavy lifting, right? It's like we go to the gym for our bodies, we do therapy for our mind, but we have to engage the spirit in order to get a spiritual cleansing. And it's like, we don't have the power to lift these things from us and lift these attachments from us. And we're flawed. We're just men, and I think that, that's like a thing that a lot of people don't talk about. So,
question in your story for timing, was the homelessness first or the attack on your brother? Which one do you want to talk about first there?
Oh, I mean, I just hit homelessness was part of the rock bottom process of getting sober. So that predated the assault. And then, and it was like the situation with my brother is, he stayed on the path, he stayed doing what he was doing. I had spent the first couple months of my recovery, sleeping on my friend's couch, going to meetings. Then I got a job at a pet store, at a dog kennel. Then I got another job bouncing, and so I literally had no car. I was riding the bus. I got a scholarship through the Grammy program. So then I got another 4 months. They let me live at a sober living before I could afford to rent a room at another guy's apartment. Right. Who was a longtime sober guy. And, and basically, I had moved back to New York, and my brother, he was on a drug bender and broke into the apartment, and I had come home to a robbery in progress, I guess, essentially, whatever was going on. And when I caught him in there, he asked me to help him murder somebody, which was not out of the blue. It's not it sounds shocking, but it's not an irregular thing.
Right.
For him. That's the lifestyle that he was engaged in, and that's the path that he chose. And he hadn't seen me, and we were completely estranged. So, I asked him to go outside, and I knew that if we got into a fight in the house, the whole house was going to get destroyed. I'm 6'1" and I'm 265 right now. My brother is an inch taller than me and about 50 pounds heavier than me. He's a big, big kid.
Wow.
So we decided, I got him to come outside, and then I told him I wasn't going to help him kill anybody. He didn't like that very much. And I told him he needed to get help, and then I would help him get sober. And basically, I went back in the house, checked the house, realized that he was probably going to go to my sister's because he was on PCP. Oh. So I switched into sweatpants and sneakers to outrun him. She lived 5 blocks away. So I didn't get down. I walked out of the apartment, got down to the end of the driveway, and I got hit from behind with a crowbar. Obviously, I didn't know what was going on at the time. I got hit, and I fell to the floor. My brother was standing over me, and he swung the crowbar, broke my arm. I managed to get on my feet. I fought him, but I remember trying to punch with my left hand, and I looked down at my hand, and my wrist was like broken this way.
Yeah.
And then you because you're in, when you get injured in like combat or something, there's so much shock. You don't have time to assess the damages. And then I basically decided to flee because I couldn't get the weapon away from him, and I ran to my neighbors and they called 911, and ambulance came and got me. And the long and short of it is during the scuffle, the crowbar had perforated my spleen. It swelled up. It's got swollen, and then it popped, and I bled to death in the emergency room. And I had a full-on near-death experience, right? Like I remember like I was having seizures, like I was having muscle spasms because the cavity where your organs are, all the blood was spilling out in there. So my legs had no blood in them, and so they started to contract, almost like it's like the most terrible cramps. It's like worse than like any like. I don't know how to explain it. I'm saying like what. And then I was holding my mom's hand, and I was just like, God, please not today. And then I had I had a kaleidoscope. I went through a kaleidoscope, and then I felt this force of going through a tunnel of light, and I felt God's presence, which was so overwhelming. It was like I don't know. It's like more love than you could fathom. It's like more than, love for your parents or kids or anything. And like, you don't know what's going on, but you know everything that's going on.
Right.
And I remember having this incredible sense of peace. And then I started to remember who I was. And then I went to this place. It seemed like a waiting room. And then I should also know, like my experience of God is that it was like massive. I mean, it was like the size of a planet. I don't know what, it's very hard to put into words what the experience is.
Well, it should be that way because guess what? God is holy, holy, holy. That's holy times holy times holy. And everyone's like, what's holy? It's something good. It's separate. Right? So it's holy, separate times separate times separate. It's totally alien, totally something that we can't fathom. So of course,
it's beyond. It's beyond. They don't really. It's like the Bible tries to explain certain things. It's like, and these guys were, communicating, 2,000 years ago. It's
they have third grade education trying to pass this on.
Yeah, it's virtually impossible to, in human language, to try to express the awesomeness of what the Creator actually is. And then, and then I went into into a white place, a plane of existence, and there were all these other souls. And nobody had bodies, and everyone was communicating telepathically. And my experience was recollecting that I was thousands of years old, and that the soul is like super eternal. And one of the beings said, "Oh, you don't have to stay now." And I had realized I didn't fulfill my obligations. Wow. And then they sent me back, and I fell.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah. It was gnarly. And then I remember falling, and it was very hot. And then I was in the Earth's atmosphere. So I don't know if I fell from space. It was just it's very hard to explain. And then I literally ended up right in the ICU. And then I went back into my body, and it was just a trip. Yeah, my nurse was my nurse. I thought I was dead because my nurse was this girl, Jessie, and she was leaning over me crying, and it was my high school girlfriend's best friend I hadn't seen in like 15 years. And I was I'm like, oh my God, they messed up. Like they put me back in my body, but I'm already dead, and now I'm stuck here. and then I like sat up, and she said, "Welcome back." And then a guy came into my room, who I never met before, and he was like, "Hey," he's like, "I'm George. I'm from Alcoholics Anonymous." I was like, what? So yeah, like I forgot that, like, in the process of going to the ambulance, I called my buddy Sonny, who was the guy who helped me get sober, the guy whose couch he let me live on for 3 or 4 months. And he got sober with this guy, George, 7 years before me and Sonny ever met. George moved to New York to get married to a woman who he fell in love with in the program and started a life there. And these guys came to my hospital bed every day and brought me a meeting. And they brought me a big book and a Bible, and we would read for like 2 hours.
Wow, that is,
so
that is the love of the love of brothers right there, right? I mean, it's never convenient, right? Showing up to your bedside, they all had lives, they all had stuff to do, but here they are fighting for you. They're fighting for your eternal soul, and that's what we're called to do. When you pick up the Bible and you go through, we're supposed to be in service to one another. Jesus said, "The greatest among us will be the slave to everyone," right? Meaning, Jesus washed Judas's feet.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like Judas's feet, the person who literally betrayed him. So, and that's what people don't understand. They expect it's going to be this great carpet ride where, hey, I'm prosperity gospel. It's going to be great. It's going to be this. No, you're going to be in a constant battle, right? If you're effective for Jesus, you're going to be in a constant battle with the enemy. And if you're lucky and God blesses you, right, you're going to have people like that lock shields with you and sit there and say, "No, brother, you're at an ultimate low right now. You are hurting right now. They're going to be pumping you full of pain meds, all these other things. We're going to be right here for you and bring the meeting to you." God bless them.
Yeah, I mean, it's these are, and so and again, these are the kind of things that override. When you come from an environment of negativity and violence, you see the grace and humanity, and it becomes difficult to continue to falsely believe that the world is a bad place and the people in it are bad, and we've, I'm still in a place where, after the massive, divide that was the cultural war and the cultural divide that's been created and asserted. I mean, it's, we have to, and I see it happening, right? There are people who there's people I wanted to kill after all the stuff that I went through.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But like, I treat everybody like it's the mafia and God is the mob boss and these people are made guys. And I'm like, all right, you gotta let it, that's how I do it. That's how I justify it. It's just like, it's like you can't go against the boss, and the boss doesn't want you, messing with,
That's awesome.
And everybody's on their journey,
Yeah. Oh man.
Because trust me, I'm not, I'm not, when I was talking on that podcast with it was Flex Lewis, and I was talking about, praying for the people who did me wrong. It's not about, it's because I can slip into anger and hatred and resentment. I'm a man, and my lower self can get activated by these betrayals. They get set off, and then, and I have bad days if I'm not being, I have bad days if I'm not being in a surrendered state.
Sure, that is so key. So there's a couple of things I want to unpack here as teaching points, as if we could, or just commentary on some things. Sure. One is getting that heart of gratitude that you're talking about, right? Like, it's so easy with all the negative. You can put on Fox News or Breitbart or the Epic Times and be miserable within 30 seconds, right? Screaming at the TV and start.
Which I often do.
Same here, right?
Yeah.
But what I have to do is I have to align my heart every day, and I do a Bible study every day called Your Daily Battle, and it's about achieving 3 victories to start your day. And the first one is getting a heart of gratitude and humbleness. Right, coming before the Lord and said, "You gave me a gift of another day today. I've got air in my lungs, my heart is beating, and no matter how much crap is going wrong in my life, it could be way worse." Right. I've been in true pain and I don't have that true pain right now. Like my kids aren't dying of cancer. Like things, no matter, I got bills to pay. Things aren't going right. People betray me. The world's going down. Nothing politically is going the way I want, but it could be far worse. And I count my blessings. Right. And then I get into the word and I seek his word, seek his will for my life. And then I pray. The third victory is praying with other believers, just on the internet with other people, and a prayer of protection to go out and do battle that day. So again, that gratitude that you were talking about there is so key. The other thing is I want to warn against, and this was my drug and still my problem, anger, right? I never had a battle with a substance abuse. Yeah, I did drugs. Yeah, I did alcohol, but it never got a hold of me. But mine was anger. If I could burn hot enough, I can make it through SEAL training. I can make it through whatever life threw at me. And when I got saved and I got grateful, God ripped that anger from me. So when I'm going to the gym and I want to throw 500 pounds up, right, that's gone. I used to be able to throw on God hates us all, and I would just get angry and felt betrayed by the universe because this is what I did before, how I acted before I knew God. And now I'm like grateful. I get in there and now I'm like, man, I'm not the Hulk anymore. I'm Bruce Banner in there, and I can't find anything that's attacking that. Now, I could sometimes replace it with gratitude, but I still struggle this day. I can't go I'm not angry. Like I watch, I'm going to say poor David Goggins. David Goggins is this SEAL guy who's got to be the most miserable on the planet. He's so angry. Like that, this whole life is about anger. And I just feel so, I pray God gets a hold of his heart and sets him free of that, and that he has something to him besides that anger. Because when that anger gets ripped from you, if you don't have God to hold you up, you're going to be just collapsed on the ground. So just a caution against anger.
Well, it's also, anger is also a drug. It's like self-righteous indignation is, it's you can get high off being right and being mad about being right. Like for 2 years or 3 years, everything that I was saying is like, I told you so.
Yeah.
But I don't derive any, I would prefer to be completely wrong. I would prefer for athletes not to be dying on the field or collapsing, and kids having heart attacks, and people dying in their 30s from myocarditis, and all these things that are being obfuscated from the public, where people are like, what do you mean? And, I'd much rather be wrong.
Right.
I wish I was wrong. I wish I was like a kooky conspiracy theorist and I was wrong. And I'd rather feel silly than if one person was alive.
Right.
Instead of the hundreds of thousands of people they've killed so far. Who knows how many?
Right.
Right. And we don't know how much longer it's going to go for. We don't know what the long-term effects are. But we do know that the people who administered these things and created them have a vested interest in culling the population.
Yeah. It's a pretty scary, dark, evil thing when you look at it. So there's a couple things I want to button up.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a couple things I want to button up, and then we can go on tangents on moving forward and all that stuff. So one, you just had a divine experience, right? Near-death experience. You met, something, you had this happen. So now you must be a crazy, passionate Christian at this point, right?
No, not even that.
Yeah, I'm being facetious.
Yeah. No, so like I already had a relationship, right? I already had an active working relationship with a higher power. It's just like things come into focus differently. I think God allowed me to reveal himself to me more and more as I could accept it. Because I think back 14 years ago, if I had, my spiritual awakening was like Jesus came down and was like, hey, bro, I would have been like, nope. I'm like, I've lost my mind. I finally lost it. And that's just where I was. So, it was I thank God I have a patient God,
Yeah, man.
Because, I'm a work in progress. My name is Thomas. I'm a doubting Thomas at heart,
Same here.
So, yeah. And so it's not, I'm a skeptic. And so, I wound up in 2020, I wound up having like this very weird spiritual attack where I started having panic attacks and anxiety attacks, things that I didn't experience for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then it was to the point where I actually like, I remember being during lockdown, I was in my home in Venice, California, and I was doing a Zoom meeting for a recovery house for young men. And I started like freaking out, and I finished the meeting, got off, and I had this weird feeling that there was someone in my house. So I cleared the house.
Right.
And then I started feeling like I was dealing with something that was not of this world.
Right.
And then I wound up driving. I remember driving to my friend's house, who's a devout Christian. She's actually staying at my house now. She's at the gym, but I came in the apartment because I felt like something was following me, and I sat in her apartment and I started to hallucinate. And again, I'm sober for 12 years.
Right.
And I started to see like her eyes, all of her eyes were black, and like her fingernails like almost like a monster movie. Like,
yeah,
like everybody looked like a demon.
Sure.
I was like crying. I explained to her what I saw, and she came out. She was like, "Hold on." For whatever reason, God put this woman in my life, and at this point, she had experiences and been taught from her father, who is a preacher, how to expel demonic presence.
And by the power and authority of Jesus Christ, boom, get rid of them, man. Good for her.
Yeah, and so she did this whole thing and opened this huge book. It's the biggest Bible I've ever seen. I'm like, and then she started going through it, and then I felt like somebody hit me with like a leaf blower, and it was just like, but we were inside.
Right.
And then I slept like the next 12 hours, and I woke up and it was gone.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about deliverance lately. There's a lot of people who I think it's completely phony. And then you have instances like this. And what you described is very real. Like when fear unnaturally settles on you, right? Where it comes from, you got no reason to be afraid. It's there. That's the spirit of fear on you. And I believe that can happen, or anxiety, or whatever the case may be, right? It's when something comes in and affects your norm that is one, caustic, negative, bad, right? And it could also be something like lust, where you're not normally a very lusty guy. Now all of a sudden, all you're craving is porn and all this. That is an attack that you should deal with, right? So now you've had this miraculous thing happen, right? So what do you do with that? So you had near-death experience. You've had multiple demonic attacks at this point. You just were hallucinating. Someone just does deliverance on you. Now where are you? You walk.
Well, then basically I started asking God to reveal himself to me.
Praise the Lord. Good for you.
And then I just kind of kept doing that. And then, he revealed himself. We had to talk. Yeah. And it was funny because I just remember, I remember praying, and it's not irregular for me to pray. And I just remember crying, and it was like, it's so weird because I'm just like, I think I saw Jesus and I was like, dude, do you know that you're famous? I didn't think it was real. It was not, this is not something that I believed.
Right.
I'm not somebody who
no, you're a scientist. You're exactly like I am in that point, and seeing this stuff is not what's supposed to happen.
Yeah. And I read, I know the history, and I've read the Bible front to back, but it's like, you're like, oh, there's him. Yeah. He's just sitting in my room. I'm like, I've lost. And this time I didn't feel like I lost my mind. I was like, holy shit. What the fuck? Excuse my language for everybody, but
you did really good, man. You made it an hour and 4 minutes. That's better than I thought you were.
But that's the only way. Those are the only expressions.
Yeah. Well, when you're not equipped to express, now I find myself saying, oh my God, or Lord Jesus, and people like, you're Christian. I'm like, no, I'm calling out to him for help because I don't know how to process this.
Yeah. So yeah, so it was one of those things, and that I've actually really never talked about this publicly, but this was an experience that happened that and I basically was like, I don't know. I think a lot of people who, when I've talked to other people about this, and I have had this experience of having him place his hands on my shoulders while I'm praying, and sometimes now, when I like go when I turn left in my, I go dark. It doesn't go away, right? We have a daily reprieve based on our practices of staying in the right lane.
Yep.
But I go dark, and sometimes I allow myself to go there for too long. And then it's literally like one of the prayers my buddy taught me was like, God, please be here now, like right now, and to pray with urgency and immediacy to have that presence come in. And it's come to a point where it never fails, right? Like I've been in situations where even in the past couple of years, like before I got, famous, before I made it, I worked as a door guy in New York City, bouncing. And sometimes, I had a guy throw a drink in my face and call me the N-word.
Yeah.
And I was like, excuse me 1 second. And I was like leaning on the wall, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm praying to God.
Pray not to smash your
I
face.
Don't break your neck and throw you down this flight of stairs and then kick your face in, so that not only are you in a wheelchair, that you never look the same again. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm drunk. I was like, kindly leave. Please leave this establishment before I go to jail. And he's like,
go to church tomorrow and thank God that you're still alive.
Oh, I used to do that to people all the time at the club. That's how they would send me in to clear out the club when it was last call. I'd be like, hey guys, you guys have a minute to talk about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? People are like, yeah. So if you're a bouncer and you need to get everybody out and you don't want to have any confrontation, just bring Jesus in.
That is awesome.
Jesus
I've never heard that used,
bouncer.
and I was a former bouncer and a former cop. Oh man. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to be right back. 60 seconds, not 60 minutes.
Yeah, not 60 minutes.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0. When I invented My Pillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. My Pillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature regulating thread. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to mypillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit mypillow.com.
So there's something I want to talk about that really touched me when you were talking about, again, praying for your enemies. And it was the desperateness of your prayer that you learned praying to get sober, right? I don't think a lot of people understand when they're in a battle of truly life and death, right? Like when you are, like, it's not like, hey, we've all had what I would call foxhole prayers, right? Where you're like, you think you're going to die in this second and you reach out. That's not. But when you're trying to resist something calling you, can you talk a little bit about that and how, how it eventually worked for you, and then talk about, again, forgiving people who did you wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best pop culture reference I can give is like Lord of the Rings,
Sure.
So, every time Frodo's wearing the ring, and it's like, even though it's this big, it feels like he's carrying around a 10-ton hammer around his neck. And then every once in a while, when everything gets dangerous, he puts the ring on, and then he's like transformed into hell, And it's just like, and it's just him in the
so
eye.
Good, man. That's so good. Did you make that up, or did someone tell you that?
No. I mean, when I watch the movie, like the entire Lord of the Rings is like is a euphemism for a bunch of drug addicts, right? You got this one little thing that you got 4 midgets, a man, a dwarf, and an elf and a wizard, and they're going on this long journey through the middle of the woods to finally get rid of the little thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is just like a night out in New York City in the 90s. You know, you got like,
funny. I'm sure J.R. Tolkien, who was a diehard Christian, would be laughing he's laughing right now in heaven at that.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
great.
But it's a good, you know, it's one of those things like whoever has the bag of drugs, like follow you to the end, Frodo, you know, and it's the false fellowship, you know,
Yep.
and you know, so I think that the desperation of a drowning man, right? That's what they talk about in the recovery book, which I believe, even though the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is non-denominational, I believe that it is divinely inspired by Christ and by God.
It was all Christian in the beginning, and then they tried to woke it up a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that my experience is that that's a great thing because, you know, it enabled it to be received by so many more people who might have had contempt prior to investigation, and you know, and I think that's something that we all should understand is that, you know, I think that attraction rather than promotion is a good way to bring people into our spiritual lives, right? People are not going to want to accept Christ or Christianity if they don't see what we've got from it, right? And so that's, again, it's like talking about taking your shame and your misery and sharing it divides it, but sharing your joy multiplies it. And so, you know, it's not just always about deliverance. It's about, you know, getting in touch with, you know, the removal of anger is space for replacement with joy in small things.
Yeah.
You know,
so I think that's interesting. Let's talk about this because we've talked about it on the show multiple times. God can use anything as an on-ramp to him, right? Sometimes he'll use a sunset, a near-death experience. He may use the Chosen series. He may use, you know, a Hillsong United song. He may, whatever he uses, he may use Joel Osteen. He may use whatever. What matters is that God uses something. He can use anything. And the more we're talking about that and the more we're dealing in this realm, the better chance we have of exposing more people to it. And, you know, so that's a very unique take. I haven't heard anyone defend the ambiguousness of the new AA program. You're the first, but I can see your point in that.
Well, yeah, I think right now, I think there's so many people who are in need of saving that the old kind of ideological tropes cast against Christians would prohibit, you know, certain people from hearing the truth. And sometimes, you know, I've definitely seen a lot of leaders anonymously quote scripture to get, you know, to inspire or get, you know, and then if people become curious, then they can ask, and then you can say, hey, check this out. And I think sometimes it's more of like attracting flies with honey rather than vinegar, because the enemy is a very subtle foe. And you can see the manipulation on so many levels of the degeneration of the American family, of just even, you know, courtship in this country. And, you know, there's just a lot has changed in the last 40 years. And it's gone in a way where, you know, tyranny and authoritarianism always comes packaged in, we're here to help. And it's what, you know, we're going to make it great for everybody. You know, it's the same. I had this argument on Twitter. Some kid on Twitter was like, well, I'm a communist and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, the reason why a mousetrap works is the same premise as communism, because neither the person or the mouse understands why the cheese is free. It's a trap.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and so,
you know, I really love Jordan Peterson and the stuff he does, because he talks about the Gulag Archipelago. He talks about a lot of things. And he, you know, again, a man of science, you know, a man of rational thought and thinking. it says the Bible's true, like, truth incarnate. He says it's what do you call it? It's a, not a mega truth. The term will come to me, but and that's why I think like him in the college front, and you got guys like Charlie Kirk as well, but really Jordan Peterson is in a class of his own, and then guys like you and guys like Topher and Bryson Gray, and then there's bands like Skillet and several others that I probably I'm sorry, I don't know.
Aaron Lewis has been a big voice in the cultural movement as well. Struggle Jennings, and there are many of us. It's hard to get the exposure because the leftist agenda owns everything, right?
Yep.
So that's part of a war, is first acquisition of communication, and centralization of information output. And so.
But that's why that's why this is so good. You coming on here and getting exposed. Christians and conservatives need to start voting with their dollars, with their eyeballs, and with their ears, right? Like you can sit here, like, here's something I love about you, right? I would never listen, I used to listen to some Lady Gaga stuff when I wasn't really saved. All that was a Christian light. But listening to you sing Bad Romance was awesome, dude. I come back in there, like you listening to you sing Tennessee Whiskey was awesome. Listening to you sing Tears for Fear is awesome. I was to the point where I was having to go to this Norwegian guy named Leo, who is this heavy metal guy who's a YouTube sensation. He redoes all songs metal. Okay. So without dark lyrics, right? So I'm getting to listen to stuff, and I'm not supporting the devil by listening to this stuff. And it's just Toto, Africa, to slamming beats and screams that I love, man. Yeah. So, watching you do that with your cover one, uncovered one, uncovered two. And then I love, dude, that thing that you just did on that remix of Hold the Line, right? Oh, yeah. Was so good with those sirens in there, dude. I was like, man, that is so what I'm looking for.
That's called a PR breakdown.
Oh yeah,
that's when you add an extra plate. You're like, all right. I was like, it was all right, Dude, that's just like, as soon as I heard that siren, you just start going to town, man. It was so good. And so again, I'd like to now shift to how we move forward, how we support people, how we win the coming battles in the culture war. Because I mischaracterized. I said that I think that artists like yourself and and The Chosen, you guys are not nuclear bombs. You guys are sealed. You guys are actually Green Berets. Green Berets are force multipliers. They're not direct action usually. They go in and they train up others, and they train up others, and they train up others, and that's how it moves. And you guys are doing that because you're red-pilling people by giving them truth in music that when they actually look at the lyrics, and they're like, wait a minute, that makes sense. And and that's where it's so key, man. Well,
and that's where I
don't even think it's red pilling, to be honest. Like, because there's I'm beyond that at this point, right? Like, there's red pilling, and then there's like black pilling, which is the the nihilistic version of red pilling. And now I've kind of in the place of the clear pill, where I don't, my actions are dictated by my relationship with my higher power.
There you go.
I don't want to, I don't put faith in the Republican Party.
Oh, me neither.
I don't put, what I mean? Like, I don't put my faith in, the political system. I don't put my,
faith in man, period.
Yeah. So, I don't, obviously I supported Trump, and, I believe I'm a constitutionalist.
Sure.
And I think that it's, I think that what I am seeing is on the culture war aspect is this. I think that and I've been very outspoken about this. Like, I have family in military family who are police officers. Sure. When the George Floyd riots happened, I condemned them. I posted a picture of me holding up a huge blue line flag when everyone posted a black square. Yep. I had a lot of, I was a thought leader in my community, in the music industry, because I was the only multi-platinum African-American artist, who was, you know, period. And I think Lenny Kravitz was the last one before me. So, you know, and so I think it's important that we use our platforms to continue to speak the truth, but I also think we can't make a sole vocation of this work online. It's dragging. I think it's going to take base work in our communities. I think that the left they launched a war on white men. Mostly, they waged a war on straight men. They waged a war on strong men, right? That was first.
Yep.
Now they've devalidated women by taking away what the meaning of a woman is.
Yeah.
And basically, what I see from a war standpoint was that these things have been done in culture in order to create a vacuum and turn people racist and hateful.
Yep.
So the division, you know, I think that one of the most horrible things that's done to the African American community is critical race theory. We are constantly telling people because, oh, you can never make it because of the color of your skin. Well, what happens is you're traumatizing children to believe that that's reality. And then rather than them spending the rest of their lives trying to make something of themselves and climb a capitalist ladder by creating things of value, you're teaching them hopelessness. And then you're blaming it on a race of people that were not alive when segregation and slavery was going on. The other thing that people don't want to talk about is slavery is an issue as a whole, has been going on forever.
Yep.
So the word slave means Slav, and Slavic people are white, and they were the first slaves.
Yep.
Right before the transatlantic slave, you know, shit. And Irish people and Italian people came to America, and they were slaves too.
Yep. And then the Chinese.
Yeah, China still has. They have
Slaves.
concentration camps actively with the Uyghurs. You know, when they destabilized Libya, you know, thanks Hillary Clinton, Gaddafi was overthrown, and now they're selling. You can buy an African person for $200 USD in Libya now, and it's legal. So a lot of the history that they're miseducating, they're misinforming, and they're creating a divide amongst races, and there is no race in God's kingdom. So people of God, all houses of Christianity, I look at this as a Game of Thrones scenario where all the houses of, you know, Baptist, you know,
Presbyterian, Lutheran,
Presbyterian, Protestant, if there was a unifying decision that all interpretations of Christianity were to align in their message and align in their what they were going to support, that is a problem for the left, because the left only works in splintering and segregating. They work in lies. Like, you know, they take things from people's past, or they make things up and they use them to destroy you publicly, where, you know, the God's will is that you're forgiven and that, you know, you can ascend and move on and become closer to his will for you as long as you seek him out. So everything about popular culture and everything that's being presented to us through the media, which is owned by a small group of people who are not the people who, they have a different God. We know who you know, we're not going to get too much into that because it's not really safe to talk about what their religion is. But their religion is not the same, and it's a very old one, and it's a very arcane one that's kept from the mass public, that they devoutly believe, which they will to their own demise, but they're trying to take everyone down with them.
Yep. Yeah. And you got to remember the direct ties to China. China's like got so much involvement in our media and pulling the strings, and, you know, particularly our sports leagues have become, they're just there to sow racial hatred. I mean, that's their only purpose now, is to sow racial hatred and distract.
I think it's deeper than that. I don't think China is necessarily. I think that they will play both sides of the political aisle to their advantage, and they also look at things in terms of centuries.
Sure.
Right? One thing that the Vatican and China do similarly is they don't Americans have this potential to look at power as a 4 to 8 year process.
Yep.
Whereas these institutions that have been around think in millennia, 100 years, it's going to take 100 years to do this, 100 years to do that. But also, so does the enemy, the people who are actively trying to ideologically subvert the morality of our nation and the morale of our nation. They're doing it effectively. And they've taken over Hollywood, they've taken over the entertainment industry, they've taken over the mainstream media. Part of the reason why, and this is one thing that people don't understand about TikTok, right, on social media. TikTok does not block people from communicating negatively about the Democratic Party. And that's why it's going to get taken away, right? It's not about China farming our information, because Facebook and Instagram have already farmed it and they sell it to China. And this is one way to everyone has had this experience. You say, hey, I need to get a new car. I want to buy a refrigerator around your phone. And Facebook or Instagram will send you an ad for it. That doesn't happen with TikTok. They don't have the technology for that. So basically, this is a PSYOP campaign that's run by Facebook and the Democrats to get Republicans to hate TikTok because of its association with China. China is okay with us criticizing Joe Biden because in general, they want to see America crash.
So you don't believe that Joe Biden and Hunter are owned by China and that they, of course,
I think
want
that
to see him lose power?
I think I think that first of all, Hunter Biden and I are separated by one person. So I know this man pretty well. He's a pathetic drug addict who needs help. He needs deliverance, and he's a very sick person who, and again, it's like I can't really say, but he exhibits the behavioral patterns of a person who was molested and abused as a child.
Well, that's in her diary. It's in his daughter's diary.
Sister. Yeah, I mean, and obviously his father and his dementia state cannot, no matter what they do, he can't control himself from exposing his bizarre tendencies towards young people and children, which is obvious to everyone except people who don't, who find it acceptable, right. And then they did a good job of creating Trump degeneracy disorder, which is like, just like a picture of Trump will turn someone into a raving lunatic, right? But it's programming. You can program monkeys to be afraid to eat bananas. Through electric
giving them shocks as they grab it. Yep.
And so, the media has traumatized people and, taught them how to think, and it's about trust. So, we saw these divides where families were breaking up in relationships and over political differences.
Terrible.
Because people were trusting the media more than their loved ones, and more than their intuition, and more than the God voice inside. So the more that we become dependent on this, it's again, a lot of these people who think they're fighting the resistance. And this has been my argument with young people who I have fans who are like, I can't believe you support the police, and I can't believe you voted for Trump. What happened to you? And I was like, you didn't read my lyrics. Like I've been talking about, I've been prophesizing for years. I have songs that came out in 2016 called Release the Cure that are about the AIDS epidemic, the potentiality that the AIDS epidemic was created in a lab and potentially spread. There's songs called Failed Creation, which is about Revelation that I wrote in 2006. Like, metal is something, heavy metal is not just anti-state. It's also like a lot of the material. I didn't go the Slayer route where it was like, because when I was in my atheist period, I felt like people who were worshiping Satan were buffoons.
Yep. Well, it was just another way to be angry at the universe, right? That's the way I treated it. I felt so abandoned. I was pissed that there wasn't a God, and I thought he was doing a terrible job. Now, obviously, I repent of that seriously, but that was my experience as an immature, wounded kid.
Well, and I think, and that's a very good, and this is another thing that I will bring up. I think that the new rebellion for kids is transgenderism.
100%.
And
You
I
nailed
think
it.
that, yeah, and I think that what's happening is, and again, I know people who I'm friends with who have gender dysmorphia. They're good people. I pray for them.
Yep.
You know, I pray
They
that
have a
they
mental
find
disorder.
yeah, and I don't judge them. That's not for me to judge. Like, if you're a good person, you're a good person. I think that in this war, where, you know, obviously these people, and I want to take it to a deeper level. The reason why these leftists' agenda is to butcher and destroy children's bodies is because their God is a hermaphrodite God. Their female God, they're pagan, and they're polyistic,
Yep.
and their female God has both male and female genitals. And people who know what I'm talking about know that I'm not going to speak the names,
Sure.
but I can just tell you know who I'm talking about. So part of this is this bastardization and desanctification of God's creation of children is the way that they pay homage to their unholy, you know, deity.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
there's multi levels on this, right? Because again, they're attacking men. An attack on the father, an attack on men is an attack on the father, right? And then attacking God made them man and woman is attacking the Bible. It's attacking strict scripture, which we believe to be infallible. And it's a domino effect, right? Once the smaller dominoes fall all the way through, the ultimate thing is to separate us from God, you know, and that, I think you're dead on that.
Yeah, and so you know, I think that, yeah, and I think that there's a depopulation agenda, and I think that there's also the pharmaceutical company. Their evil is so brilliant because they were like, we're gonna kill you, or we're gonna sterilize you, and you're gonna pay us to do it.
Yeah. So let's turn. This is the Hope Report. So I want to end on some high notes. I want to give some people some takeaways
Well, yeah,
to move forward.
this is what the high note is. This is what I want to get to.
Okay.
When experiencing these people and these young people, handle with care. Don't judge them. Don't berate them. You know, keep a loving door open. Leave the light on for them so that they can come home. Because we have a responsibility to be lighthouses for everyone, whether it's like whatever race they are, whatever their religious background or lack thereof, or whether they're confused about things. You know, there can't be we can't have closed door Christianity. The church doors have to be open for, like, Dan the homeless guy who wanted to get a cup of coffee, you know.
Absolutely.
And sometimes Dan the homeless guy is a 13-year-old kid who's confused about their gender because they don't understand the feelings that they're having. They're probably being exposed to porn, and their schools are exposing them to all kinds of madness and insanity.
Yeah, you got that right. And, you know, again, we're called to be lights in the world. We're called to be lights in the darkness wherever we go. And you don't do that by wagging your finger, right? You love on them. All right. And again, don't lie to them. We're never called to lie. You're called to speak the truth. You know, I tell people, like, for example, like, you know, you mentioned this massive divide that we now have, and, you know, where it's, you know, family members are torn apart right now. They've successfully divided us, you know, to where there's family members that won't talk to me because I'm a Christian conservative. And, you know, so again, it is about, you know, when you're at the kitchen table and someone says, this is what I counsel people to do. Someone says something that, you know, well, there really are 129 genders or something like that. Here's how you handle that at the kitchen table. I just want to say I don't agree with that. We don't have to talk about it. I don't want to blow up our dinner, but I don't believe that. To let them know there's not consensus, and then you can move on at the table. You don't have to preach at them. You don't have to say, but in that moment of truth, you're called to say something, right? So what do you think about that, Tommy?
Well, I mean, in that setting, you know, it's like a boxing match. You know, half the time the things that people are saying are out of anger, confusion, or it's not even them saying it, right? It's a lower vibrational frequency that's being a form of influence, which I experienced under attack, right? And anytime I lose my temper, or I am in a low, or if I'm depressed or suicidal or angry, and I'm struggling with those things, it's because I'm in a lower spiritual dimension. And that's where those things, those entities exist to whisper to us, right? So I have to just say, like, in those situations, you know, and I've responded like this before. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm not particularly aware of that, but I like to have a conversation with this some other time. And I find that if you, and I've had this happen, like I met with a friend and sat down and said, okay, explain it to me. And I don't debate them. I just let them say what they're saying. And then I say, well, I believe this because this, based on science, and this. And, you know, more often than not, I think the problem is that at the root base of most of these people who are confused, they want attention.
Totally. It's a club that they
heard.
instantly get access to.
Yeah, they want to be heard. So, but what happens is that people who don't see, who feel, especially kids that feel unseen and unheard, they will be more receptive to you if you hear them and see them, and then you can redirect them.
Yeah. So again, I think we're taking a little bit two different approaches. You're saying I would love to hear your case for that, whereas I'm saying, you know, I don't agree with that. I'd love to talk to you about that. We don't have to blow up the kitchen table. So again, I think it's two different tactics to take there. The reason why I say mine is there are other people at that table who are going to agree with you, who may not voice it. And if you don't voice anything, if you just let the 129 genders slide across the table, it appears to be consensus, which is an endorsement of a lie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I look at it as, you know, I look at it as if an alcoholic person is defending their alcoholism to me.
Right.
Then and that's how I approach it. I'm like, we should talk.
Sure.
And then everything's just gentle suggestions. I'm like, all right, you know. And at the very end of the day, what it can do is, you know, you might have a conversation with somebody and you might not change their heart, but you might give them a key. And then they, you know, because that's what happened for me. There was plenty of people who during my drug and alcoholic benders, there were nice people who were like, hey, are you okay? Like, have you thought about this? And no one ever pushed it on me, so that when it was time for me, you know, to realize the way that I was living was damaging myself and my family, I was able to, you know, when the time was right. So sometimes, you know, God charges us with the tasks of like barges of sand, right? Because if eventually, if you put enough sand on a barge, it'll sink.
Yep.
You know, and so and it's just like information. Like if someone is buoyant and refusing to listen to truth or reality, just maybe a little sand here, and then over time, if
like
we all put a little sand, it'll eventually sink in, and they'll be like, wait a second, like I'm living in a fantasy.
Yep.
And that's essentially what this is like, you know, if people want to live action role play, they're completely entitled to. I think the real issue is that the demanding and the legal forcing of the rest of society to participate in a make-believe game is insane. And again, I think that, you know, traditionally speaking, I believe that people have gender dysmorphia. I don't believe that, you know, I believe that people who are you know, who are like, today I'm a boy, tomorrow I'm a girl, this day I'm that. That is just multiple personality disorder.
It's multiple person. It's a scream for attention. You know, we used to dye our hair a freaky color or get tattoos to do that. And now they're doing cutting off body parts, and that's kind of permanent. You know.
Well, also too, I think our culture was stay away from me, leave me alone. The internet has changed it to like, everyone please validate me. Where, you know, I think a lot of, without the inception of the internet as an adolescent, being disaffected, you wanted everyone to be away from you. You listened to loud music and angry music and got tattoos. You know, a face tattoo used to mean back the fuck up, and now it means let me read you a poem about my vegan bicycle. You know, you know?
My vegan bicycle.
The times they are changing.
Yeah. So the last thing, I don't know if we ever closed it out, and it was the desperate prayer aspect. And again, I wanted to talk about that because in that podcast you talked about, hey, the sobriety part and how you were praying so desperately, and then one day it was gone, and then you had to pray for the people who'd done you wrong that way, and then something happened, and that we kind of lost that. I think we got pulled off on a tangent. If we could bring it back to that, and then we can wrap, because I know you've been really good with your time.
So I prayed every day. So I did this kind of cross country drive in 2022. You know, it's funny. I was planning to move, and one day in January, I was driving to LA. I was in LA driving to the gym, and I got onto the expressway, and there was traffic, and I heard God's voice was like, "No, it's time. We're leaving." And I was like, "Right now?" And he's like, "Yeah, turn around, go home, and pack it up." And I went home and I packed up all my shit and just bounced.
Wow.
When, you know, I literally took everything, you know, I packed up all my bags. I threw everything in my car. My bass player moved into my apartment, you know, and stayed there till
And you went to Nashville.
No, well, yeah, I mean, I took 3 weeks to drive there. It's only a couple days. So I went to Arizona first. I went on a spiritual journey without trying. So I saw my friends who are sober, and I did my buddy's podcast, and then I met with his sober group and these guys who they have a men's group that work with the monastery, the nun monastery. They take streetwalkers off the street, and they show up armed and ask the women if they want a place to stay, and they bring them to a house sponsored by
armed to protect them against the pimps, I assume.
Yeah, because the pimps come and they'll shoot at the bus and everything, and they, you know, whatever. So they basically rescue prostitutes, and then so I got to spend time with those guys, and then I just kept doing this trip and got food poisoning in El Paso, then went to Dallas, you know, hung out with David Harris Jr., who's a really good friend of mine.
Cool.
We had dinner, and they introduced me, him and Steve Weatherford and Ryan Stewman introduced me to Pastor Keith. Cool. And then I attended service, and then there was another spiritual, you know, awakening. And, you know, this was a suggestion that I was in this transitional place where I was on the other side of everything, but I couldn't surrender my resentments. And, you know, I'm the kind of person who I've done terrible things, you know, and I think that someone who has, you know, in my disease, I think that even though there's grace, sometimes when you're betrayed or when extraordinarily bad things happen to you and people act bad towards you, you want to reach back into those old solutions that are my old solutions would prohibit me from spending eternity with my creator.
Amen.
You know what I mean? And so like,
good for you to realize that. But so many of us go back reflexively to the dark side.
Yeah, but I think it's easy. It's very easy. It's actually, you know, killing your enemy is not difficult if you have experience doing it.
Nope.
But you can't live a spiritual life, and you can't hope to walk in the kingdom of heaven for eternity if you're not going to abide by the rules that the Creator has set out for us. And these are things that we know. And probably what people don't understand is for you know, some of us who were probably born in the wrong century, that it's quite difficult for men who are completely capable and comfortable with executing these kind of things to go against it, especially when everything that we've learned and trained to be is that. And that's why I understand the struggle of a lot of combat veterans and soldiers and people who have to do the dirty work so that the rest of us can enjoy freedom. So you're going against all the instincts that you've been taught, and it's so painful to be filled with so much rage that you either are going to, like, and this was my experience, you either have to turn this over because it's unbearable, or you're just going to go insane.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what happens to a lot of vets, right? The ones that don't find God, they end up going some form of insane in the end. And you just pray that God's going to reach them and that they're going to realize they can't do it on their own. It's not about, getting the biggest FU in the world to carry you through everything. It's not about that. It's about, living in service to others. It's about this life being a sacrifice for, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. It's about finding meaning and service, and you're doing that, man. I'm like, I see what you're doing. No one's blowing your trumpet or any of that stuff. You're fighting the fight. You're grinding it out. You're doing these things, and it's so great to see. And I know you're meeting a ton of opposition. How can we support you? I saw you saw a crowdfunded concert. How can people support what you're trying to do?
I'm on. So I have, you can follow me on Instagram. Or, honestly, like, social media is whatever. I don't really like to be on there, and it's quite negative. So I try to route people to Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes. I have a website, TommyVextOfficial.com. You can buy my albums there if you want to support me. I'm going to be launching a free tour across the nation, probably in a month from now. We're going to do a crowdfunded tour, because the industry, those who we do not speak of, have blocked me from being on anyone else's tours.
Wow.
We finally got some conservative program directors at Rock Radio to pick up my music again, so that's good news. And
Great.
I just went with a management firm. So things are starting to move slowly back in the right direction. And I'm talking to Aaron Lewis about doing concerts. If you know who Aaron Lewis is, he's the singer of Stained. He has a few country records out. Diehard Patriot, very good man.
Am I the only one brings me to tears every time I hear him, man? That acoustic
song.
Version. Oh my God.
I have a song called "What America Meant to Me."
I have the lyrics up over here, and it's very powerful.
We might get a feature. We might do a re-release and do a duet feature with somebody. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, great. It's a beautiful song. I was reading the lyrics to it. And I'm like, man, because it really is. And I know where your heart is. I love you, brother. I've never met you in person, but I feel a camaraderie with you. If there's anything I can do ever, if you ever have a new initiative that's coming up and no one else is letting you on, we will always let you on. I want to support you in everything you do, because I think you're such a force for good.
I appreciate it, man, and the feeling is mutual. It's whenever two or more are gathered.
Amen. Brother, you've been such a breath of fresh air. I'm so glad Topher hooked this up. I'm going to thank him personally after this. And again, I mean that when you get another initiative and you're doing your tours, or if you just have some deep thought you want to come on because you've had a spiritual breakthrough and awakening, something like that, just reach out to me. We'll get you on.
Will do, man. I appreciate it. And thank you. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope everybody has a blessed week.
All right. I'm going to have to go back and edit some bleeps in this time, but it's first time. But
I tried. There's only three.
I know you did. You did good.
3.
You did like 4, I think, 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all good. That's great, man. From watching your other interviews, you did real good, and you kept it past the hour mark, which I'm like, man, there's no way we're going to make that.
Awesome, man.
God bless you, brother. I'll be praying for you, for real. And if there's anything I can do, you got me on there. Let me know if I can pray for you for anything, anytime. Or if you ever need to talk, I'm here.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you.
All right. God bless you. You can stay on right after this. I'm going to run this, and then I'm going to kill it. And then if you want to talk after 1 sec.
Okay. I'm going to go use the restroom now.
Okay. Go for it. All right.
You're listening to The Hope Report. If you were blessed by this episode, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channels.